called Dequervains and Dequervains. I prefer Dequervains, but probably the French pronunciation is more Dequervains. Anyway, it's an inflammation. So let's say we've worked together a couple of times. I've explained to her that what she has is inflammation of the two tendons that go to her thumb. One of them is the abductor pollicis longus, which is right there, and the abductor pollicis brevis. So it's like the two tendons on either side of your, help me, I'm blanking.
Pollicis.
No.
Basal.
The anatomical.
Oh,
That was way better than that. All right, I had a step grandmother that did snuff. It was nasty. Anyway. Just saying. All right, so if she comes in with complaining of pain on just the dorsal side of her wrist and thumb, sometimes it's all sort of inflamed and they're not really sure what it is. So the test for Dequervains is Finkelstein's. And what you do is you put your thumb in your palm, put your fingers over it, all right? And then you bend your wrist to the ulnar side like this, all right? And if that produces pain here, and it does me when I do it. Yeah, I did it this morning. I was like, oh, I think I have that. So that just means that those tendons can be inflamed. All right, so that's Finkelstein's test. And then you would also do a pinch, gauge. Somebody give me a pinch gauge, please. Thank you. And so I would probably do the 3 different types of pinch and see what they are and compare them to the other side, especially if their other side's not inflamed. So hopefully y'all remember how to do. All right, so I want you to do this one first, lateral pinch. All right, good, and record that. And then I want you to do this, and record that, good. And then I want you to do this one. All right, and then I would do both sides. So you have a baseline, and you might do that every couple of weeks that you see them. You're probably not going to see them more than once a week for maybe, I don't know, 4 to 6 weeks. In orthopedics therapy, oftentimes you'll see a patient either once a week or twice a week. Sometimes when they're right out of surgery, you might see them every day, but that's rare. So generally the most you see them is 3 times a week. But for Dequervains, I would probably see it more like once a week. All right, depending on their insurance. And so, if they're acutely inflamed, I would do an ice pack. And since the tendon's sort of, a long ways, I would prefer not to do ice massage. So remember with an ice pack, and I would use a much smaller ice pack, but you need like 4 to 6 layers. You might have that on them before you work with them or after you work with them. And I wouldn't do heat until you start to do more passive range of motion with them, because it probably really isn't that they have stiffness. They probably have full range, but it's painful if they go full range. So it's not so much about stiffness, and I don't think heat is really the appropriate thing usually with them. So it's more about icing when they're inflamed. But you could do heat once they're no longer inflamed if they have, some stiffness where they're not able to get full range. And the most appropriate splint is the long opponents because it puts them. This is the because it supports the wrist, the CMC, and the MP, and so that tendon runs, you know, all past all of those joints. And so the splinting is really helpful in decreasing the inflammation. But if they go back to whatever caused the Dequervains in the first place, then they might flare it up again. So our job is to help them look at their work situation and set up things that are better for them ergonomically. So this might be a diagnosis that I use a ergonomic work assessment, and I'll post one in the same folder as the Google Docs. Let me see if I can pull it up here briefly, and I would only address the things involving the thumb. I don't have to address like if her docking station is the right height in terms of looking at her monitor and those kinds of things. But oftentimes we see people, the Dequervains is they've overworked their thumb muscles in their job. I see it, I've seen it quite a bit with women that do a lot of crafts or sewing or knitting or cross stitch or any like needlework kinds of things. I also see it in new mothers a lot, and it's hormonal, and it's picking up the baby, and it's also positioning the baby for breastfeeding. So I've treated several women that have trouble with that. You know, if you're not used to picking up 8 or 10 pounds, especially if your hormones have created some sort of inflammation of your tendons, then that can be a problem. I see it with people that do a lot of handwriting, and I see it in people that have certain sports like racquetball players. Where I was going is the ergonomic. All right, so on my computer, here is a assessment called the Computer Workstation Ergonomic Self-Assessment Checklist. And so I would especially just be interested in the ones that are more involving the thumb. So we're looking at the mouse specifically, and how her hand is on her mouse, and if she's able to straighten her wrist and relax her wrist on her desk. Before the keyboard, and is the mouse as close to the keyboard as possible, and is it comfortable for her hand to use? So you might experiment around with different types of mouse that have, you know, smaller, larger, that put the thumb in different positions to see which one would work better for her. So you don't necessarily need to do anything with vision. I would say something to think about if you're doing a lot of computer work is to take breaks. So you can put a program on your computer that will like shut down every hour, and then you can put like thumb exercises that pop up on your computer. So it sort of reminds you, take a break, you know, don't use your thumb 8 hours continuously typing, and find the mouse that works for you, and you might need a wrist rest to put her thumb in a better position. So there's lots of information out there on different types of keyboards, and there's a keyboard that you can type sideways like this. I don't know how much y'all looked at in some of your other classes about ergonomics. Have y'all had much on ergonomics? Okay. And then, all right. You know, so if I were looking at this with carpal tunnel, I would concentrate more on the wrist. If I were looking at it with neck pain, I would concentrate more on the monitor. So it depends on, you know, what diagnosis you're looking at for ergonomics, but I definitely think using 8 ergonomic checklists or evaluation in some of these diagnoses is important because we're incorporating the category of work, and so many people use computers in their work. All right, let me see what else. I would progress her from protecting the inflamed tendons, and you might keep her in the splint 6 to 8 weeks. Generally, you don't have surgery for Dequervains, but you can if it's a long-standing problem. And so first would be protection, and then do the gentle active range of motion thumb exercises, for a few weeks when she can tolerate that. And about the time she's weaning away from the splint, you can start putty exercises, but I would start with the lightest color, which is usually yellow. And I would concentrate on doing like thumb flexion, the NP and IP in opposition. And so I would concentrate, that's when the tendons are stretched the most. And then I would concentrate on radial and palmar abduction. So those are probably the movements that I would concentrate on with Dequervains. And then for adaptations, it helps if they bring in whatever they're working on. So if she's a knitter, or if she's a crocheter, or if she's a gardener, if they can bring in the tools that they're used to using, like knitting, you can build up the knitting handles. Or gardening, you could talk to her about ergonomic gardening tools, or building up the handles on the gardening tools. With lifting the baby, you might have them lift their whole palms instead of, a lot of times they'll put their thumb and index finger under the baby's arms like this, or even toddlers, and that's how they pick them up. Not the best way to pick them up because it really strains those tendons.
You've got about 3 minutes.
Okay. What did y'all add on the document? Do you remember?
We mentioned a harness, to limit picking up the baby.
What do you mean?
Like a harness,
Oh,
like for the baby.
got it. Yes, that'd be helpful.
She's that built up handle. She mentioned that in hers.
Let me see if I can pull up more Google Doc from here. But yeah, so you would have your evidence-based article that you would talk about, and you would have part of your home program. But mostly it's about adapting things that cause problems, and showing different ways of doing things, like different ways of lifting the baby, the harness for the baby, that's a great idea. Excessive handwriting. There's a big debate going on in OT circles right now, whether we should even still teach handwriting to kids that have problems, because we don't do as much handwriting as we used to. How many of you send handwritten notes to people, or but we've just gotten so dependent on our electronics is that we don't do as much sustained handwriting as we used to. So this might be a time to show them about e-cards, so we can send people cards to their email, or other ways of adapting. Having Alexa keep your grocery list, or whatever else alternatives you can suggest to that. If it's like a sports player, I might refer them to an athletic trainer. I personally don't know a whole lot about racket sports. I mean, you could look up stuff and learn, but you also want to utilize your other healthcare professionals. And so, if they play at a competitive level, like in college, or in a national league, then they would certainly have athletic trainers that we could work with on that. All right, other comments or questions? Yes.
Is there a different type of splint that you would prefer? Because you seem kind of hesitant.
Well, in my clinic, and I think I told y'all this before, we made radial gutters instead of palmar. So this is a palmar longipunens, and I just prefer the radial. better among opponents, just because it frees up more of the hand, but this is fine to use. It's just that you're limiting the sensory input into the palm. But yeah, when I first put it on, I thought it was just a cock up, but then I got it on and it's like, oh no, it is a long opponents. That's why I was like, is this the right thing? If they have a significant amount of swelling, you can somebody throw me a roll of Dequervain right beside you? The brown, no? Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. So if someone has some, obvious swelling, this is Dequervain, and it sticks to itself, it's kind of like an ace wrap, but you can wrap the thumb. These come in 1 inch, 2 inch. I would probably use a 1 inch for the thumb. But this is an easy way to control some of the swelling. And you can still use your hand with this on, and it's reusable. You can take it off and on. This way when you get wet. So that might be something that you do before you put the splint on. Is sorry, it's not fitting there. Okay. So that I use Dequervain a lot of times to control swelling in the fingers and the thumb and the wrist because it's relatively inexpensive. It's reusable. And it does a pretty good job of cutting down the swelling. And with Dequervain, when you're using it to reduce swelling, you always want to wrap it distal to proximal, because you're forcing the fluid back out of the arm into the body. All right. Thank you.